Welcome back to our Sitting Up Varsity series, Want to Start a Fight, where we pick one high school and lay out some arguments about who was that high school's greatest athlete of all time. This week we limited the random school generator to just kind of traditional Class C schools. I can't remember what year I picked Class C, and it picked out an interesting one from northern Buffalo County, the blue and white of the Ravenna Bluejays. Okay, no complicated nickname history or name history with Ravenna except how you pronounce for Ravenna. And you can see I'm going with the pronunciation of my Lou Platte-raised father. I have to think Ravenna when I type it, but it's Ravenna when I hear him say it. And so I guess jump in the comments if you want to argue with my dad about that. All right. Ravenna High has an interesting history. It really does. Definitely a golden age that we've just kind of experienced here in the 2000s with quite a few state championships and state runners-up. And then they have a era way back in the 20s during the all-comers basketball tournament where they won several titles, several pretty significant titles. And then in between, I wasn't sure what there was. Boy, there's a bunch of stuff. They had some good teams. They had some good teams that had some bad luck as far as getting recognition on the statewide stage, if you will. All right, that's where we're headed today, the Ravenna Bluejays. Okay, you already heard me mention the Lou Platte. Ravenna was an original Lou Platte member in 1958, and they remain there today. Before that, they spent some time in a conference called the Mid-Six, which was pretty regional, Three Valleys, which was pretty regional, and the Trans-Nebraska, which existed in the late 40s and then right up until the Lou Platte started, which was kind of an attempt at a, not quite statewide, but a pretty big footprint for a Class B conference. Southern Division, including Geneva and Hebron and Superior, and then a North and Western Division up from Minden up through Ravenna and Broken Bow. So a very interesting conference. Didn't last very long, but interesting in history. Okay, so how are we going to attack this to find the GOAT of Ravenna High? Well, definitely that golden era we just went through, you know, where they're winning multiple state championships between 2005, really a state runner-up in 2003 starts it, and then that decade, there's 7 state championships and 4 runner-up finishes. I think that's where our greatest athlete's probably going to come from, but I think we should start at the beginning, and that takes us back to those all-comers basketball tournaments where Ravenna won 4 state titles. And a lot of times when you see all-comers basketball championships, you're like, oh, okay, but what class? Were they winning M and K? And no, they've got a D championship and a B championship and a couple B championships and a C championship. That's pretty impressive. So let's start with those. Oh, hold it. We better not start with those. I think we got to start really kind of in the prehistory of high school athletics. Kind of the dark ages, way back. In fact, Jerry Mather in his book, which we've stolen our Want to Start a Fight phrase from, named the greatest athlete in Ravenna as John Pesek, who probably would have been about a 1915 graduate of Ravenna. He was born in 1894. Okay, I don't think he was ever really a high school athlete. I'm not sure he was a high school graduate, which in that year would not have been uncommon. He's famous as a professional wrestler and a greyhound racer, which is pretty interesting stuff. Pesek was called the Nebraska Tiger Man. He's in several Hall of Fames as a wrestler, and you have to remember in that era, the wrestling was more real. He, in fact, really fought against the acting and the fake fights and all those things. And there's a statue of him in Ravenna, and so he'd be a great candidate. But like I said, I don't think he graduated. Even by like 1913, I think I see him in the papers back in Ravenna, and they say he's from Omaha then, winning like decathlon type events that they were hosting. Or actually, I think he finished second in the Sokol games that they were having. So I think he had left Ravenna before that, probably before completing what we would consider now high school. But John Peshek, definitely someone we should mention. Okay, now on to those all-comers teams. Ravenna goes to almost every all-comers tournament between 1914 and 28. They're there almost every year. In 1918, they win Class D with wins over Clarkson, Edgar, Gresham, and Seward. They just whomp Seward in the final 30-2. Lloyd Hageman is the star of that team. So there's another candidate. In 1921, they're back in Class C, and they win that. Paul Mingus is a star there. Paul Simerson is a star, but the big star is Clark Smaha. Smaha. It's kind of spelled like Omaha with an S in place of the O. Clark Smaha, and he'll be the hero again the next year when they win Class B. And the big win that year was actually the first round, the round of 16. Smaha has to hit a shot in the final minutes to beat York. And then they really kind of handle everybody else all the way through North Platte, Seward again, and the Genoa Indian School. Okay, and so now they've gotten 2 straight championships, a C and a B, to go with that D earlier. Then a few years later, another group of athletes wins the 1927, again, the Class B title. So Ravenna is competing at the very top of what I guess you would call small or even mid-sized Nebraska high school towns here in the 20s. The Boswell brothers, Howard and Irvin, are big players on that team. But Leo Maverkic is the one who gets honored with all tournament team. They beat Seward, St. Edward, Clay Center, and Norfolk that year. So a lot of big names, nobody popping up like in multiple sports yet, though. And so that's interesting in our conversation. The next great school year for Ravenna High is 1940-1941, just as we're on the cusp of World War II. In 39, they had been 8-0 and ranked in the top 10 in Nebraska in football. So an undefeated team, and at that point, top 10 is just top 10. There's no classifications anybody's rating in. Same in 1940. They go 9-0, ranked in the top 10 of Class A. In the spring of 41, then they're runners-up in the Class B state track meet. So you know you got some good athletes going there. The football stars in 40 were an end named Dale Bays and a fullback named Tommy Etherum, who really probably got the most attention statewide. Colorful Tommy Etherum, they called him. They beat Gothenburg on Thanksgiving Day for the big finale, the big win to end that undefeated season. Eartham, that's how I should say Tommy's name, Eartham, was 4th in the 100-yard dash that year, and he ran on the sprint relay, the 800 relay, that won Class B. Bays was 2nd in the Class B pole vault. So both of those guys, excellent candidates. Eartham, then, as you can imagine, high school boys at that time served in World War II, and he was killed in Italy just weeks before the German surrender. He had gone on to Kearney, looked like he was going to have a big college career there when he got called away to service. I think on Memorial Day, it's very apt that we remember athletes like Tommy Eartham that gave their last full measure for this country. He was Ravenna High, class of 1941. All right. A younger guy playing with Bays and Eartham would have been Jack Peshek, John's son. He was class of 42. He was a hurdle and discus state champ. He went on to be a football letterman at NU. He was also a pro wrestler like his dad. And he had played on that 40 undefeated team as well. He was a junior lineman and a kicker. So he's an excellent candidate there in football and track, just like the previous two. The next guy to hit our radar is class of 1948, Ron Clark. He's an all-state football player, goes on to be a 3-year NU letterman. He won a couple track state medals in the hurdles and the pole vault too. So Ron Clark, again, in the 40s, lots of good candidates from Ravenna. We move on now to 1961. Gary Graham becomes the school's first two-time All-State football player. As a junior, he led the 1959 team to a number 3 finish in Class C. And then as a senior, he led them to another Class C top 10 finish in 1960. He ran on 3 straight mile relays, the one Class C state championship. He won the pole vault himself, and he medaled twice in the quarter mile and once in the long jump. So to me, that Gary Graham's starting to look like our first maybe leader in this race. In 1963, Ravenna brings home a big state trophy. They bring home the track runner-up trophy again, Class C this time, led by Mike Briggs, who ran on the championship sprint relay and was 5th in the 100-yard dash, and Jerry Arp, who also ran on that relay and finished 5th in the 200, the 220, and 4th in the quarter mile. Okay, next we jump ahead in the 60s to an era of great football in Ravenna. 66, 67, and 68, they sweep the Lou Platte titles 3 years in a row. It had never been done before. They're undefeated in 66 and 68, but get this, they're only rated statewide in 67. How's that work? Well, 67 was the only year they were in Class C, which most of the Lou Platte schools were. In 66 and 68, they bumped up to Class B, which would happen in September. You'd be going, you'd play a couple games, and then basketball classifications would come out. Remember, there's no football classifications because the NSAA is not recognizing champions in football. But the state raters, the newspaper fellas, would use the basketball classifications. So when Ravenna bumped up to Class B, that took them out of the C ratings, and their schedule just couldn't quite get them enough newspaper love. So that 66 team is undefeated. Randy Redfern is an all-state back, an all-state center on that team. In 67, Hal Ridgway and Rich Stickney are all-staters on the team that ends up rated in Class C. And then in 68, they come back, and you kind of sense a little chip on their shoulders there. You know, 2 great teams, not a lot of statewide recognition. Back in Class B, probably not going to get a lot of statewide recognition. They did play it. Centura was up into B. New School Centura was up into B, but not a strong team and no history at that time. They played Grand Island Northwest. Not much history at that time. Class B, but not a great Class B team. They didn't have a lot to get attention, so they set their goals on not giving up a point. And they didn't give up a point. One of the few teams in Nebraska high school history, 1968 Ravenna Bluejays, unbeaten and unscored upon. Pretty impressive. Their star was Henry Hyder, who was actually a junior that year, and he'd be All-State in 1969. In 1970, the Blue Jays make noise on the wrestling mats. They get their first ever champions, Mark Gilming and Ken Masick. Win at 137 and 175 pounds in Class C. Really probably their best wrestling team is not going to be till a decade and a half later. 1984 team finishes 4th in Class C, but with no champions. Depth. In 1978, we get a bright shining star, Paul Reinertsen. Paul Reinertsen is an all-state basketball player, and he's one of those amazing scorers of the 70s, averaging 37 points a game. Every game Ravenna plays, the opposing team is throwing a different defense at him. And Reinertsen is one of those workhorse basketball players that you would read about then, growing up. These are the guys that I read a lot about and wanted to emulate, guys who were always in the driveway shooting, were always finding a way into the gym and becoming great scorers. You kind of had a scoring explosion in Nebraska high school sports there. Like I said, he averages over 37 a game. But reading these old stories, you can see the kind of weight he's carrying. At that point, Ravenna hadn't been to a state tournament since 1928. They hadn't even been in a win and go to Lincoln game since 1961. And I did a quick count in between that 1928 game and when they finally did make the state tournament. Spoiler alert, it's not with Reinertsen. It's not till 1986. They lost 15 games when you're on the cusp of Lincoln. Okay, and so you got a town that feels a little snake bit basketball-wise, even in 78. And there's a lot of quotes from Reinertsen and his coach about how he really wants to be the one, and he got him close. He got him all the way to the regional final game with Centennial. but they fell there. Still a great athlete. He will end up taking Gibbon to the state tournament as coach in 2013. I competed against him when I was at Blue Hill. Great guy. His son was on that team, a great scorer, as you can imagine, also a great golfer, and took the Buffaloes to state in 2013. Ravenna's next great team is the 1982 football team. And again, they had some bad luck with when they had great teams. They're in Class C1, okay, and they go 8-1. Their only loss was to fellow Buffalo County team Gibbon. I think it was 9-3. 9-3 game, very close, very hard-fought game. Leaves them 8-1 through the last week. They still thought they might sneak into the 8-team state playoff. They didn't make it. They ended up ranked number 3 in the state. Gibbon finishes second. They won all the way through until they lost to Republican Valley. So Republican Valley 1, Gibbon 2, Ravenna not even in the playoffs, number 3. James Teichmeyer was a star on that team, as was Larry Zeller and John Cremosta. In 86, they finished 4th in Class C track. Tony Schirmer is the star of that team, a sprinter. He's the 100 and 200 champion and helps anchor the sprint relay that wins the championship. And Ravenna finished 4th in Class C in 86. Then I'm going to jump to 2001 for a great football player from Ravenna I think should get mentioned. That's Brad Bond. Class of 2001, a 2-time All-State lineman. He goes on to UNK, starts for their conference champs and their first-time Division II playoff qualifying team, and also a great student, an all-conference academic guy. He was a student regent at UNK. Then he goes to med school at Nebraska, the medical school in Omaha, and he becomes a student regent there. He's the only person to ever be a student regent at 2 different institutions in the Nebraska system. He's now a professor of family medicine and a practicing family physician at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. So pretty impressive. But that gets us to Ravenna's golden age. Between 2003 and 2018, the Ravenna girls win 3 state championships, finish runner-up 4 times. It all starts with the 2003 volleyball team that makes it all the way to the finals before running into Guardian Angels. There are several greatest athlete candidates on the girls' side. Start quickly with one before the golden age. Becky Cremosta, who went to Hastings College with me. She was Ravenna's first All-Stater in 1985. She once returned a very important baseball cap to me. I really appreciate that. Probably doesn't get her in the GOAT conversation, but a great athlete nonetheless. In 2006, you got Heather McKeon, a 3-time All-State basketball player. She's on the 2006, leads the 2006 team to a basketball revenge victory over Guardian Angels for that state title. She had been on the volleyball team that was a runner-up. She will go on to Hastings College, really pretty solid career there as a Hastings College athlete. So she's a possibility. Following her is Madison Pernasek, class of 2009. Now her specialty is volleyball. She's a 3-time All-State All-Nebraska pick in volleyball. She is on both the 08 volleyball and the 09 basketball team, both of which win titles. The 2 state titles in 1 year makes her somebody you really want to take a look at. Then there's Jordan Fidelke, who's a 2-time All-State basketball player in 2019, despite losing that senior year of 2019 to a knee injury. And she led the girls all the way to the state final, where they ran into the Meyer girl from Superior and lost, but led them to a runner-up finish there. Another great athlete. And then finally you have probably the greatest, well, I think definitely the greatest girl track athlete at Ravenna, Alexis Dale, class of 2016. She was a 2-time high jump state champion. She medaled the other 2 years in the high jump. So that's a great crop. I think I'm going to take McKeon by just an edge over Pernasek. Heather McKeon, class of 2006. The biggest thing, and this tips it for me a lot, she went and won that first state title. The first state title Ravenna had since 1928. and she leads them to it in 2006 girls basketball title. So I'm going to name Heather McKeon as the greatest girl athlete ever of the Ravenna Blue Jays. The golden age on the boys' side for Ravenna is even tighter. Between 2005 and 2012, 8 years, they're going to win 4 state titles and finish runner-up another year. They're going to have a basketball team that electrifies the state of Nebraska. That first championship team. Really, a lot of those guys were juniors when they won in 2005 and beat Wakefield. And then the next year's the year they play Bellevue West in that big small town versus big city match, and really gave the Thunderbirds a run. A very, very good Bellevue West team. Gave them a run before they ran out of steam a little bit. But then they get upset in the state final by Aquinas. By Aquinas in a great basketball game. The stars of that team, I think, are our first GOAT candidates. Tyler Cyborin, I never was quite sure. Help me out in the comments. He's a great multi-sport athlete. 2-time All-State basketball player, averaged 17 a game, great guard, great ball handling, good shooter, good going to the hoop, kind of the all-around game. Also, all-state wide receiver, consensus all-state wide receiver for the Blue Jays. His partner on that great team was Drake Beranek, son of the coach, the great Paul Beranek. Also 2006, he's a 3-time All-Stater, an All-Nebraska pick. He averages 24 points a game. He goes on to star at UNK, really be a great Division II player there, and decide he wants to go see can he be a Division I player. Heads to Nebraska, sits out a year. Remember when people used to have to do that? Sits out a year in order to do it, and then becomes a great role player for Nebraska, and leads them to the NIT. He's the current Kearney High boys coach. Then you got a couple other All-Staters, because they're going to win a state basketball title in 2009. You got 2008, Greg Nissen, All-State basketball player, and then 2009, Adam Mingus, All-State basketball player. And then you got part 2. You got the little brothers coming, and they're going to win state basketball titles in 2010 and 2012, and that's Connor Beranek and Trevor Cyborin, both 2012. Trevor is a 2-time All-State basketball player. Connor, 3-time All-State basketball player, like brother. He goes to Doane and puts up a great year. Great year. And you know it has to be pretty good if I'm going to say something good about a guy from Doane. He's all GPAC and the league's freshman of the year. So what does he do? He goes to see, hey, can I play at a higher level? He heads to Kearney. Transfers to Kearney, where he's a 3-time all-conference player. He's the MIAA player of the year as a junior, and he ends up playing professionally in Europe. A lot of great candidates there. The boys' side of Ravenna, a little more difficult. Okay, this is the part of the video where I have to make a decision, and it's a hard one. First of all, I want to make special mention again of Tom Ertham, who gave his life for his country on this Memorial Day. Certainly one of the greatest Ravenna Blue Jays of all time, and a lot more than just athletics. And remember, this weekend is a time to remember all of those folks who gave the last full measure for this country. All right, Ravenna's hard on GOAT. First of all, imagine if we were just doing a greatest basketball squad of all time. Think of the 5 Ravenna can put out there. You got the 2 sets of brothers, the Cyberns and the Beronics, and then you throw Paul Reinertson into that. That's a pretty good 5 that's going to compete with lots of schools, no matter the size. I think what I'm going to do for the GOAT, I think I'm going to share it between 2 brothers, Drake and Connor Beranek. I'm not sure there's a way to pick between them. Two great athletes, and along with their father, really the face of Ravenna High for a long time there, really put the Blue Jays on the state athletic map. So I'm going to pick those 2 as the greatest athletes of all time in Ravenna history. All right, you see how tough this gets when we start dealing with schools that are still up and going, with long and great athletic histories, but it was certainly a lot of fun. I really enjoyed seeing the Ravenna picture come into focus for me as I studied it closely these last few days. All right, it's time to pick another team. I'm certainly looking for ideas in the comments. I can run it through the random machine again. Maybe I ought to put all the Class B teams in and see what we get. I don't know what you'll get next. Thanks for watching Suiting Up Varsity and Want to Start a Fight.